Hello, and welcome to My Vote Counts, a webinar produced by the Michigan Department of State and Bureau of Elections, providing you with accurate information about voting in elections in Michigan. I'm your co-host, Sarah Reinhart, Director of External Affairs at the Michigan Department of State, and I'm joined here today by co-host Keela Crane, Deputy Legal Director at the Michigan Department of State. Today's topic is a special session of My Vote Counts titled Michigan Elections 101 for Justice Advocates, and we'll be covering topics such as voting rights and voting options for returning citizens, as well as general voter information, empowering your community, and more. I'd also like to thank our partners for today's webinar, including Fresh Coast Alliance, Nation Outside, Proactive Grand Rapids, Tailor Made, and the Michigan Department of Corrections, Office of Reentry Services, and OS team. Before we get started, I want to do a bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar, which means that viewers are not able to turn on their microphones or cameras. However, we still would love for you to engage in today's session by using the Q&A feature in Zoom. If you have a question during our presentation, you can submit it and we may answer your questions live at the end of today's session. You can find the Q&A button along with the Zoom menu, the Zoom button, the Q&A button along the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. So let's talk about some important dates and deadlines as it relates to the upcoming general election on Tuesday, November 5th. Monday, October 21st is the last day to register to vote online at michigan.gov/vote. Tuesday, October 22nd is the recommended deadline to request and return an absentee ballot by mail to avoid potential mailing delays. Saturday, October 26th through Sunday, November 3rd is the statewide early voting period. It's important to remember that some jurisdictions in Michigan may offer more than the minimum required 9 days of early voting. For example, Detroit begins their early voting period on Saturday, October 19th. Monday, November 4th at 4 p.m. is the deadline to vote in person with an absentee ballot at your city or township clerk's office. And on Election Day, November 5th at 8 p.m., it is the deadline to return your signed and completed absentee ballot by hand to a drop box or to your local clerk's office. Election Day at 8 p.m. is also the deadline to register to vote in person at your city or township clerk's office and is the deadline to get in line at a local polling place to cast your ballot. Remember that as long as you're in line by 8 p.m., you will be permitted to vote. Michigan.gov/vote is your one-stop shop for all things Michigan elections and for your personalized voter information. By visiting that site, you can update your voter information, you can check your registration status, you can ask for and track an absentee ballot, you can view a sample ballot for your jurisdiction, and you can also find your local clerk, polling place, and early vote site information. All right, now I'll hand things off to Keela Crane, Deputy Legal Director at the Michigan Department of State, to get us started. Just remember that if you have any questions during any portion of tonight's presentation, you can submit it using the Q&A function in Zoom. Keela?
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. So let's talk a little bit about how elections are administered in Michigan. Michigan elections are decentralized, meaning that all the power resides in our local clerks and county clerks' offices. Michigan's elections are carried out by our 1,520 city and township clerks all across the state, as well as the 83 county clerks that hope to support and supplement the work of our city and township clerks by coordinating election materials, managing county level contracts with election vendors, programming election equipment, and so much more. Then you have our Michigan Bureau of Elections, which is a nonpartisan office within the Michigan Department of State. Here, they provide guidance and standards to all clerks across the state about how elections should be carried out uniformly and in accordance to Michigan and federal election laws. And finally, our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, is the state's chief election officer, and she has broad authority over elections, but she does not directly administer them unless she exercises her supervisory control. So on the day of elections or during our early voting period, these are the folks who actually administer the elections at that time. So you have your local clerks, who are the ones who run the show across their jurisdiction. They are responsible for administering the elections either in the city or on the township level. They hire all of the elections inspectors and the chairpersons, and they instruct them about how to do their work. And they also train those elections inspectors about how to do their work as well. Or the county clerks may also train and provide guidance to those elections inspectors. Then you have a precinct chairperson. That person is the lead election inspector who manages the polling place and other election workers at that precinct. And then finally, you have your election inspectors. Those are all of the folks that are at the precinct that help administer the election day polling work, either on election day or during the early voting period. Most folks call them poll workers, but their official title is an election inspector, and they are paid and trained government workers for that time period. Now let's talk a little bit about how you can access your right to vote. In Michigan, voters have the right to accessible polling places. Both federal and state laws require accessible polling places. There's also a right to have voter assist terminals to help folks cast a ballot. So if folks need to utilize an accessible device to plug into the VAT to be able to mark their ballot. Every person who may need to utilize that for dexterity reasons, or they may be hard of hearing, they have the right to utilize that voter assist terminal, and for that voter assist terminal to be at every single polling location, both during early voting period as well as on election day. And all Michiganders have the right to vote independently and privately, with or without assistance, utilizing a VAT, or with the assistance of their chosen helper. In Michigan, you also have a right to curbside voting. Someone from the polling location would have to come out to the curbside to assist and provide you the ballot. The person, the voter, marks their ballot and gives it back secretly to the elections inspector. There'll be at least one election inspector from both major parties, and then they take it back into the polling location to make sure that it's put into the tabulator. You also have the right for assistance in voting and language access. You can bring someone with you to the polling location to help guide you through making your selections on election day. So whether that's a person that helps you understand the English language better, if English is not your first language and you're more proficient in another language, or if English may be your first language, but it may be difficult for you to read or understand how to mark your ballot, you can bring someone of your choice with you to your polling location. However, there are exceptions to this rule. That person, number one, of course, cannot influence you to vote. That person cannot be your employer or an agent of your employer. Also, that person cannot be a member of your union or an agent of your union. The main subject tonight we want to talk to you all about is the voting rights for returning citizens. We are proud in our state that we um, have accessibility for returning citizens to exercise their right to vote. And we want to make sure that we are debunking this myth all along the way this evening. So residents who may have returned from incarceration or may be in jail pending sentencing, you can vote. So plainly put, you can vote once you leave incarceration. You can vote if you have a past felony conviction. You can vote while you're on parole or probation, or while you're in jail awaiting sentencing. You cannot vote in our state if you are currently serving a sentence in jail or prison. And also, you cannot vote in our state if you are not a United States citizen, you have not yet reached the age of 18, or you will not reach the age of 18 on election day, or if you are not a resident of the state of Michigan. So again, You can still register and you can still vote if you have a criminal record with felonies on it. You can still register and vote if you have an outstanding warrant for your arrest. You can vote if you have arrears or you're in arrears for child support. You can also vote if you have unpaid legal fees or parking tickets. None of these issues will stop you from exercising your right to vote. When you decide, if you decide to go to a polling location during early voting or on election day, you are not required to present a photo ID if you don't have it. If you do have a photo ID on your person, you are required to present that to the election inspector. However, if you don't have it on your person, you can sign the affidavit of identity and you will be able to utilize a regular ballot to mark and cast your vote. I do see folks have a hand raised. If you can drop your question into the Q&A, we'll get to that towards the end of our presentation this evening. So what are the voter ID requirements? The acceptable photo ID requirements here in Michigan are a Michigan's driver's license or state issued ID, a driver's license or personal ID card from any other state, a federal or state government issued photo ID, a United States passport, a tribal identification card with the photo on it, a military ID, a student ID from a high school or accredited institution of higher learning, or a concealed carry permit. Your photo ID does not actually have to have your address on it. Your photo ID also can have a shorter version of your name. So, for example, if your name is William, it could have Bill on it or Billy. If your name is Catherine, it could be Kathy or Kate, so long as the election inspector can identify you as a person who is on our e-poll book and is trying to vote on that day. One of the great new laws in 2023, the legislature removed the prohibition on providing transportation to the polling locations, which is fantastic. So this means for the first time in Michigan, you can now transport people to the polls either during the early voting period or on election day. If you recall, there was a big consternation in previous elections on whether or not I could provide persons ride to the polls. So there was a law in place at the time in 2022 in previous years. But as of now, you can take someone to the polls. You can hire an Uber or a Lyft to take someone to the polls. All of that is acceptable under Michigan law. So how do you register to vote in Michigan? Keep in mind, if you want to register to vote online or by mail, you must do so by October 21st in order to vote in this presidential election. Who can vote here in Michigan? As Sarah and I stated earlier, in order to register to vote here in our state, you must be a United States citizen. You must be a Michigan resident for at least 30 days. You must be at least 17 and a half years or older, and you must not be currently serving a sentence in jail or prison. If you can tick all of 4 of those boxes, then you can register to vote here in Michigan. Now, there are a lot of questions about pre-registration in our state. In Michigan, young people who are 16 and 17 can pre-register to vote, meaning that on their 18th birthday, they will be automatically registered to vote unless they opt out sometime in between that time. But young people who are 17 and a half, they are actually registering themselves to vote so that on their 18th birthday, they will be automatically registered and eligible to vote without doing anything extra. So how do you register to vote? You can do it online, you can do it by mail, or you could do it at your local clerk's office. Now, if you're trying to register to vote on or after October 22nd, you must register at your local clerk's office. meaning your township or your city clerk's office, and that can include up to and on election day. So how do you register to vote from jail? As we stated, a resident who is incarcerated in jail, pending trial or pending sentencing can still register to vote. As with all Michiganders, you must request a voter registration application to be mailed to you from your local clerk's office or from the county clerk to the jail. You can complete the form and mail it back to your local clerk's office using the prepaid postage. You can list your address on your registration form as a place you lived before your incarceration, because this determines what will be on your ballot. If you put your address as the prison, excuse me, as the jail, then all of your decisions about what you'll be voting for are going to be based upon where that jail resides. If a resident who is incarcerated in jail has access to the internet, they too can register to vote via michigan.gov/vote. And if they're able to do the registration there, they can also request an absentee ballot as well at that very same site and have that ballot come to them directly to their county jail. But again, that deadline is quickly approaching. October 21st is the deadline for all persons to register to vote via online or by mail. One of the newest voting rights that we have here in the state of Michigan is the right to early voting. And statewide early voting begins in Michigan on Saturday, October 26th for the mandatory 9-day voting period. And so we are really excited that all Michiganders for the first time have the ability to participate in in-person early voting. And as Sarah said earlier, there are some jurisdictions that will elect to offer more than 9 days of early voting, and that is up to them. They have the ability to offer at least, they have the ability to offer 29 days of early voting, but all jurisdictions must offer at least 9 days, 8 hours per day of early voting. If you use the QR code that's on the screen, you can go to michigan.gov/early voting to find out where your early voting centers are. An early voting site is really just like a polling place on election day. You go, you talk to an election inspector, you complete the application for a ballot, you pick up your ballot, complete it, and put it right into the tabulator, just like on election day. However, it's great because there are options all over your city or maybe even all over your county for you to be able to cast your ballot. So while you're out running errands or picking up your kids, you can just go to an early voting site, cast your ballot, and you're all done. Unlike election day, where you have to go to your specific precinct to vote. That's the major difference and really helpful tool about early voting. And again, if you go to michigan.gov/early voting, you can see more information about how you can participate. So when can you early vote? Most Michiganders will begin early voting on Saturday, October 26th, and it will run through Sunday, November 3rd. It's at least this 9-day period, but like we said, it could be more. The city of Detroit is doing theirs beginning in on October 19th. I know Canton Township is also offering 14 days of early voting. So you have to look to see where your what your local jurisdiction is doing in order to make sure that you have the right number of days for that jurisdiction. You also need to look to see what times they're open. Some will be open from 9 to 5. Some will be open a little bit earlier or maybe even a little bit later. So you need to make sure that you look at what your local jurisdiction is doing for early voting so that you have all the information that you may need. Another great right that all Michiganders have is the right to vote at home via an absentee ballot. After the constitutional amendment in 2018, all Michiganders have the right to vote via an absentee ballot without an excuse. So, how do you request an absentee ballot? Same rules apply. As Sarah said earlier, michigan.gov/vote really is your one-stop shop. In this case, it is your ability to request an absentee ballot online. You can also request an absentee ballot via mail. All of your local clerks have the absentee ballot application, or if you go online to our website, you can pull down that absentee ballot application, complete it, and fill it out and send it in. Or you can just go directly to your local clerk's office and complete the application right there and actually just grab your absentee ballot once you're done. So, what is new with absentee voting? Now, Michiganders can join the permanent absentee ballot list. That means that you will receive an absentee ballot before every election. The state also provides prepaid postage for your absentee ballot application and your absentee ballot itself, meaning you don't have to search around for a stamp in order to send back your application or your ballot once you complete it. You can also track your absentee ballot and your absentee ballot your absentee voter application status at michigan.gov/vote. So you can see whether or not your local clerk received your application for an absentee ballot, whether or not your local clerk has sent the ballot out to you, whether or not your local clerk has received it once you send it back. You can see all those steps on the ballot tracker. And then finally, all jurisdictions will have at least one drop box in their city or town. And for every 15,000 residents in the jurisdiction thereafter, they will have another drop box. That is to ensure that the drop box are spread out equitably across your jurisdiction. So you don't have to go too far in order to see an official drop box. Keep in mind, make sure that you're putting your ballot into an election drop box and not the drop box to pay your water bill or any kind of other kind of municipal bill that you may have. That sometimes trips folks up when they're going to put their ballot back into the drop box. Make sure it's the right drop box to receive ballots. So what does remain the same about absentee voting? Everything else remains the same. The clerks and their staff will verify a voter's signature both on the absentee ballot application as well as when they send or receive your completed and signed ballot back. Voters who spoil their absentee ballots must submit their notice for and request a new ballot in writing to their local clerk's office. So say you were completing your absentee ballot and you messed up on something and you want to spoil it and get a new one. You have to submit that request in writing to your local clerk's office in order for them to issue you a new ballot. And then finally, only authorized individuals may handle a completed absentee voter ballot, meaning once it is in the envelope, sealed, signed, only certain people can handle that envelope. It's either the voter themselves, a person that lives in the voter's household, immediate family member, parent, child, spouse of the voter, or a postal worker. If you're not in one of those categories, you cannot handle another person's completed absentee ballot. Also, if the local clerk deputizes someone to collect a ballot, that person is also eligible. But others, besides that, no one else can handle an absentee ballot. So, how do Michiganders who are currently residing in jails request an absentee ballot? So, a resident can complete the absentee ballot application to receive a ballot. And you can encourage residents to have the ballot sent to the jail, of course, so that they can mark their ballot. All Michiganders must complete, sign, and send the ballot back to their local clerk's office by 8 p.m. on election day for their ballot to count. We encourage justice advocates to work with your local sheriff's office to ensure they will permit the election mail to get in and out of the jail in an expedited fashion to ensure that those residents' votes can indeed count. A resident can also ask for help, just like any other Michigander, if they need it to complete their ballot. Those workers inside of the jail cannot solicit residents to help them. The resident has to request that assistance from that particular person in order to receive it. If a person does help that resident complete their ballot, that person too must sign the back of the envelope, and we'll show you that in a slide. This slide shows you what the back of an absentee voter ballot envelope looks like. So on the back of the envelope, you'll see that, again, the person has to assert that they are meeting all of the qualifications to vote in our election, and the voter signs on the ballot. Right below where the voter signs, if someone assisted them into complete their ballot, that person must sign and print their name as well as their full address. So if you get an assistant to help you, there should be 2 signatures on the envelope to send back with your ballot. If you were able to complete your ballot on your own, it's just your signature or the voter signature that needs to be on that envelope. And then you mail it or put it in the drop box or hand it directly to your local clerk's office. So what are the rules around voting on election day? Let's talk about it. Before you even go to the your polling place, number one thing is you want to check your registration status. If you are not registered at your current address, please visit your local clerk's office by 8 p.m. on election day to re-register where you currently live. That's super important. You can take the time now, of course, to go online as you're listening to us, michigan.gov/vote, and make sure that you are registered where you are. You can also double check the location of your polling place. Your polling place may have changed since the last election. There may be an emergency, and so your polling place may have to temporarily relocate to a neighboring school or neighboring house of worship. So you want to make sure you are going to the right place. You can also check that at michigan.gov/vote. And finally, you can view a sample ballot. It's great to be prepared before you go into your polling place of who's on your ballot. How long do you think it might take for you to complete your ballot when you get to the polling place? And do the research about who's on your ballot. You can look at all of the offices up for election and all the people who are vying to be the officer for that particular position. And you can go on michigan.gov/vote to see the sample ballot. And you can also check out the information about the candidates at vote411.org or many other nonprofit organizations that are giving candidate information. So once you have done all your homework, now it's time to actually go to your polling place. All polls are open on election day from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. local time. So when you're going to your polling place, make sure to bring an acceptable form of ID. Look for signage for the location and the entrance. Sometimes your polling place is in a big school and schools have multiple entrances. So you want to make sure that you're going to the entrance that will get you quickly to the area in which voting will be occurring. You then want to locate where the election inspector is so that you can check in. And finally, if you happen to arrive at your polling place and are in line by 8 p.m., you can still vote. So make sure you're staying in line, because if you get out of line, you will not be able to come back. So if you find that you are rushed out from work and ran to your polling place and you were in line by 8 p.m., you are still eligible to vote. Once you're inside your polling place, In addition to the election inspectors, you may see some other folks there who are also a part of the whole elections process. You may see an election challenger, and you also may see a poll watcher. So, what are the difference between these two folks? An election challenger is typically a non governmental volunteer election observer. They're typically appointed by a political party or an interest group to observe elections. All challengers must display a valid credential saying who they are or who they represent. Now, a poll watcher is simply there to observe. They also typically are representing a non governmental organization. They won't usually have any credentials on them saying who they represent, but sometimes they may. Poll watchers have much more limited rights than a challenger, but both are there to observe and ensure that our elections run smoothly. Poll watchers and poll challengers cannot assist voters at a polling place, and MDOS and local clerks do not hire an election challenger, nor do they hire poll watchers. We want to provide you a little bit more information about election challengers so that you're not intimidated when you go to the polling place. Election challengers, their role is outlined in Michigan election law. They have the ability to challenge a voter's eligibility to cast a ballot at that particular precinct. They also have the ability to challenge the actions of an elections inspector, making sure that they're doing their job correctly. They also can challenge a absent voter at the polls. Like, why are they there? Question whether or not they have canceled their absentee ballot and then are voting in person. They're able to make those challenges. Any challenge must be made based on a good reason to assert the challenge. It can't just be some random issue. The challenger cannot do it to delay the process, or they can't do it based upon a voter's race or appearance, or even on their perceived political affiliation. There must be a good reason for the challenger to raise the question, such as, I know this person does not live in this area in which the precinct serves. That is a good reason to challenge. And then the election inspector will look to see if there is legitimacy to that challenge. Another thing that you should be aware about is our electioneering laws. We have a 100-foot rule here in Michigan and pretty much in every other state. What that means is that there are certain things that cannot happen within 100 feet of the entrance to a polling location, such as campaigning for a candidate or a ballot measure, requesting signatures or signing of petitions, or wearing or bringing in election or campaign related clothing or accessories. So if you have a shirt or a hat that is for one candidate or another, or maybe perceived to be for one candidate or another, you cannot bring that into the voting location. And an election inspector, in particular, the chief election inspector, may request you to turn that shirt inside out or take off the cap, because you cannot have those items within 100 feet of a voting location. And again, the chief election inspector has the right by law to enforce the 100-foot rule. We want to make sure that we talk about voter intimidation because we've been hearing a lot about that on the news. So we want to let you know what your rights are around voter intimidation. And of course, all Michiganders have the right to be free from voter intimidation. In fact, it is illegal to interfere with a voter's right to cast a ballot, both in Michigan law as well as federal law as well. Voter intimidation may look like individuals who are not election workers or election officials that ask voters for personal documentation. It may look like photographing or videotaping voters without their consent. It might be even looking like blocking the entrance to a polling place or clerk's office, an absentee ballot drop box, or questioning and harassing voters. And it could also even look like disseminating false or misleading information about our elections. It may show up in many different ways, but those are some examples. but all of it is illegal. You cannot intimidate, coerce, or interfere in any way with someone being able to cast their ballot. If you feel that is occurring where you're going to cast your ballot, or even simply trying um, to register to vote, there are a few things that you can do. You can call the Election Protection Hotline, which is 866 Our Vote, or 866-687-8683. This is a Michigan-based volunteers service that they are on standby to assist, especially during the early voting period and on election day. It is a part of the National Election Protection Apparatus. There's also local and state elected elections officials that can be of service to you. In addition to the 866 Our Vote, our Michigan Bureau of Elections will be on standby all day on election day to answer questions from voters and ensure that you're able to cast your ballot. If you find that there is a life or death emergency at a precinct, you have every right to contact the local law enforcement. And local law enforcement have been trained and updated by our office on how to interact with voters and with incidents at polling locations. We are clear that in years past and even in present, that a overwhelming police presence at the polls may seem like intimidation or may scare some folks away from the polling place. And we have been working with law enforcement on all levels for years to make sure that they are able and helpful in ensuring that everybody is able to cast their ballot and that they're able to do so without any intimidation, but also that they are not causing an undue burden or harm on residents who may be showing up there at the polling location. We know it's a tricky balance, but we have been working well with our law enforcement partners here at the department to ensure that everyone has a safe time in trying to cast their ballot. There are other election protection hotline numbers in case English is not your first language or your most proficient language. There is a Spanish language hotline, as well as an Arabic language hotline. And there's also a hotline for AAPI languages, such as Bengali, Cantonese, Hindi, Korean, and Vietnamese. So if you are more proficient in those languages, or you know folks in your community may be more proficient in these languages other than English, please do make sure that you disseminate these hotline numbers into the community so that they can get the questions that they need answered. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah so she can talk to you about how you can empower your community to vote this November. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Keela, for all that really important and excellent information about voting in Michigan. So now we'll move on to a brief overview about empowering voters in your community before moving on to our Q&A. So here are the 3 steps each voter can follow when making their plan to vote, and you can help voters in your community make their plan to vote using these steps as well. So number 1, verify your voter information at michigan.gov/vote. Check your information, make sure it's up to date and current, that you're registered at your current address, and that you're visiting the right polling place or early voting site or clerk's office before visiting those sites. Number 2, check where to vote at home, or choose where to vote at home or at your clerk's office, by mail with an absentee ballot, at an early voting site during the early voting period, or on election day at a polling place. The choice is up to you. And the last step here, step 3, is vote. Here are some important deadlines that we've reviewed earlier in our presentation, but that are important to remember. You must return your absentee ballot, and it must be received by your local clerk by 8 p.m. on election day. So that can be returned at your local clerk's office or to a ballot drop box by 8 p.m. Early voting takes place this year statewide from Saturday, October 26th, and it ends Sunday, November 3rd. And then on election day, of course, polls close at 8 p.m. And remember, if you're in line to vote at 8, stay in line and you will be allowed to vote. If you're helping register voters in your community or running a voter registration drive, here are a few important things to know. Anyone can help an eligible citizen register to vote. There is no minimum age, citizenship, or residency or registration requirement. And prior experience or training is not required, although we know that a lot of very wonderful organizations do offer training for voter registration, and it can be very helpful if you do opt to take that training. You can use the Michigan voter registration application that is printable, available at michigan.gov/vote, or you can use the online portal where residents can register to vote online at michigan.gov/vote to register voters. Just remember that the deadline for doing both of those things is October 21st. That's the last day you can register to vote online or by mail. And then here's some don'ts if you're helping to register voters. You cannot pay or incentivize someone registering to vote. You cannot compensate someone registering other voters based on the number of voters they register or based on the number of voters they register of a particular political party. And then finally, you cannot complete or fill in any missing or incomplete information on someone else's voter registration form. Even if it's your own mother, and you know her address and she left that part blank, you cannot fill it in. It must be done by the individual themselves. It's also important that our communities are empowered with the knowledge that our election system in Michigan is secure and that they can trust that their vote will count. Michigan's elections process has built-in checks and balances to ensure security, fairness, and accuracy of our elections. Independent bipartisan boards of canvassers certify results at county and state levels. Clerks and state officials conduct hundreds of risk-limiting audits, post-election audits, and Michigan uses national best practices for election security. In a future episode of My Vote Counts, Keela and I will actually discuss what happens after Election Day, and we'll cover many of these subjects. So I hope you can all tune in at that point to learn more on this. And lastly, you can empower voters in your community by helping stop the spread of misinformation. Here are a few tips on that. You can prepare for and pre-bunk misinformation. We all have seen misinformation about elections online or heard it from acquaintances or friends or family members. So we know what to expect for 2024. So it's very helpful to make sure you do your research about what's accurate as it relates to Michigan elections. So that way, when you hear that misinformation this year, you know already that it's not true. Always verify information before sharing and only share accurate information from trusted sources. I know it's really easy sometimes when you're on social media to click that share button for something you think is funny or a meme that you see, but it's extra important during election season to make sure that what we're sharing, especially about elections and voting, is true. So you can check your sources at this website, michigan.gov/SOS fact check, to see if what you're seeing online is true. You can also forward any misinformation or any misinformation that you're not sure is true to our inbox at misinformation@michigan.gov for fact checking. This helps our department counter any false information circulating online by distributing accurate elections information or adding additional details to our fact check pages. So here are a few common fact checks we've been seeing this year so far in 2024. So the first one I think Keela referred to earlier is the fact check that returning citizens immediately upon exiting prison can register to vote in Michigan even while on parole or probation. The next one we've seen a lot of this year, only US citizens can vote in Michigan in every state. Only US citizens are eligible to register to vote or cast a ballot in any state or federal election. There is no evidence to support claims that large numbers of non-citizens have voted in past elections or are registering to vote in 2024. And in fact, the name of everyone who registers to vote in an election is a public record. So it would be very easy to see if non-citizens were registering or voting in large numbers. And the last one that we see a lot of every year around election time or election season is You can vote with a Sharpie. The use of a Sharpie or permanent marker to mark your ballot will not invalidate or cancel your ballot. If the marker does bleed through to the other side, the ballots are designed so that if they bleed through, it does not touch or come near a voting area on the other side of the ballot. And it will not alter or cancel any vote on the opposite side. And often Sharpies are actually the recommended marking instrument by tabulator manufacturers because it dries quickly and will not leave residue on the ballot scanner. I know when I visit my polling place, I use a Sharpie to cast my ballot every time. All right, well, I hope you found that segment informational. We'll now move on to our Q&A segment. So we have a lot of questions that you all have submitted. I've been answering a few of them in the chat, but we have a few of them that we're going to answer here live. So Keela, whenever you're ready, I'll give you the first one.
Awesome, let's do it.
All right. Can you use a credit card that has your picture on it as a photo ID to cast a ballot?
No, unfortunately not. That's not one of the acceptable forms of ID that is outlined in the Michigan election law.
Our next question also has to do with voter ID. I was taught that in addition to allowing student IDs, a faculty ID from an institution of higher learning is also valid for voting in person. Can you confirm this? And if so, would this also be true for faculty IDs from K through 12 institutions?
So that's a great question, actually. I don't believe that, well, actually, you know what? How about I get back to you instead of me speculating? I have not been presented with that question before, but it's a great question. So if you can send us your email address, or we might have it from the registration, we'll find out and get back to you.
Thanks. And I have the name of the individual that submitted this question, so I think we can follow up with them.
Awesome. Thanks for the question.
You may, how many people who are incarcerated know that they have the right to vote?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we know at least 8,000 of them. Due to our Returning Citizens program, we work with the Michigan Department of Corrections to be notified when people who were incarcerated in state prison have exited. And if they have not opted out to be registered to vote, we have registered them. So over the past 3 years, we have registered over 8,000 Michiganders upon exiting prison to vote. So we know at least 8,000 of them, but we do work with our partners to spread the word. So hopefully through this webinar, you can talk to returning citizens about their right to vote. And if you are connected to folks who are incarcerated, please do let them know that if they're incarcerated pre-sentencing, they still have the right to vote. And if they are incarcerated post-sentencing, that as soon as they return home, they have the right to vote.
Thanks, Keela. Yeah, the answer to that one is not enough. We want every Michigan resident who is eligible to vote to know their voting rights, including returning citizens, which is why we're here today.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question, when a teen has pre-registered to vote, when is the local clerk supposed to mail the voter registration card to the new voter?
Yep, as soon as the voter is eligible to cast a ballot. So it would likely be after the young person turns 17 and a half. That means that upon their 18th birthday, or if they will turn 18 by the date of election day, they will be eligible to vote. So they would send them out their voter registration card.
Next question. Once you are registered and have voted in prior elections, are you registered forever unless you move?
Yep, you are. And a great way to check that is michigan.gov/vote. You want to check it before every election or whenever you get so inclined, and just make sure. We're human and things happen, but you should be, your voter registration status should remain the same unless you move.
I should note that there is an exception if you have not been an active voter for a certain period of time.
That's true.
Keely, do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great caveat to that, Sarah. So the National Voter Registration Act, the NVRA, requires every state to keep active and clean our voter rolls. So if we get an indication that you have not moved, excuse me, if we get an indication that we believe that you moved, then we or your local clerk will send a card to your home saying, hey, do you still live here? If you sign it and send it back, you'll continue to be active. If you do not sign it and send it back, then we will put your voter registration as an inactive status. And so what you need to do to move it off of an inactive status is simply go vote or contact your local clerk saying, hey, I've missed a couple elections, but I'm still here and I still want to be active. Then they'll flip you back to active. However, once you are on inactive status and have not voted for an additional 2 federal cycles, then you will be removed from the rolls. So it's important that you keep in contact with your local clerk if you decide not to vote in election for some reason, but otherwise you will remain registered to vote until you do move. But great caveat. Thanks, Sarah.
Sure. Next question. If you vote absentee, will your local clerk automatically send you an absentee ballot every election?
Only if you sign up for the permanent absentee ballot list. That is available now to every Michigander. So you have to sign up to be on that list with your local clerk's office, and then they will send you out a absentee ballot before every election.
And I believe that's a checkbox on the absentee ballot application itself, isn't it? You can check it to request an absentee ballot for every election.
Yep, you should be able to do that now.
Next question. If I forgot to mail in my ballot, can I drop it off at my precinct on election day?
I believe you can do, I know that you can do it during early voting for most places. I would not, even if you could, what I would better suggest you do is drop it in your Dropbox. That way you know that the local clerk's office has it in the Dropbox, or take it directly to your local clerk's office as well, because what you don't want to have happen is it not be in the correct place by 8 p.m. on election day, because that is the deadline for it to be either at your local clerk's office or in the Dropbox. So that would be my recommendation.
Mhm. And what you could also do instead, if you've completed your absentee ballot, but you change your mind and decide that you want to vote in person at your polling place, you can take it there on election day and surrender it. Correct, Keela?
That is correct. And what those steps look like is that you would take it over to your election inspector. The election inspector will call the clerk's office saying, hey, this person came, they want to surrender their ballot and they want to vote in person here. They will fix the QVF, the qualified voter file, scratching out your absentee ballot so that both of your absentee ballot and your in-person ballot cannot be counted. Only one of them can be counted. So they will scratch out the fact that you wanted to be a absentee voter, allow you to be able to vote in person, and then you will be issued a regular ballot to vote in person. It takes a little bit of time, so you have to pack your patience if that's what you want to do, but that is just to make sure that every Michigander only votes once.
Great. Next question. Can a voter be challenged based on their perceived jail or prison status? And does the electronic poll book reflect if a voter is on probation or parole status?
That is a great question. No, they cannot be challenged based upon whether or not they are a returning citizen or whether or not they are on parole or probation. And no, the qualified voter file does not have that information in our systems at all. So that would not be a permissible challenge under Michigan election law. But that's a great question.
Yes, it is. And for context, the qualified voter file is the list of all registered voters that is maintained by the Bureau of Elections. And the e-poll book is the list of voters within a certain precinct that poll workers have on election day that is pulled from the qualified voter file. So none of that has information about a voter's parole or probation status.
Yep.
Next question is, on an absentee ballot, if a clerk determines that the signatures do not match the signature on record, what happens?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And one of the new laws that we have in place here in Michigan. So, by law, every local clerk must contact the voter saying, hey, there's an issue with the signature on on the back of the envelope that you submitted your absentee ballot. And then the resident has 3 days. So for the November election, they have until 5 p.m. on the Friday after election day to reach out to their local clerk and fix whatever was the issue with their signature. If they don't fix it by then their ballot will not count. But that is what we call curing. And there's also a process with that if there's a mix up or there is a mismatch with their signature on their ballot application. So at both points, there's an opportunity for voters to cure any deficiencies that the local official may have found either on the application or on the completed ballot envelope. Great question.
Awesome. Next question. How does a person in county jail request a voter registration or AV ballot application?
So they can either, if they have access to the internet, they can go on to michigan.gov/vote. And they can request it online, just like any other Michigander. If they don't have that ability, then I would certainly either contact a person on the outside if they're connected to a family member or an agency that works with them. There are other nonprofit organizations that will actually come into county jails and help residents who are incarcerated apply for an absentee ballot or register them to vote. And there are also some county jails and sheriff's offices that will empower residents to do that as well. So between those three opportunities, that is how residents who are incarcerated in county jails can either register to vote or to request an absentee ballot.
Next question. How do you cancel your absentee ballot in order to vote in person?
Yep, great way. So we just kind of answered that question earlier. You would go up to your you would bring the ballot with you. You would take that to the election inspector, tell that person that I want to vote in person instead of voting this ballot. They will call the clerk's office just to verify that you have not voted already and to cancel the ballot that they have in hand. Once they make that switch into the qualified voter file, then they will move you over to allow you to vote in person. And then they will issue you an in-person ballot. So again, we have a checks and balances so that your absentee ballot is canceled out. It cannot be counted. It'll be discarded, and then you'll be able to vote in person if you decide to do so.
And you can do that before election day too, correct?
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
All right. Next question. The prohibition against disseminating false information about election is regarding election rules and places for voting, not necessarily false information about candidates. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. When does the signature curing process have to be completed for an absentee ballot to be processed?
Great question. So it has to be completed by Friday, November 8th at 5 p.m. in order for the ballot to count.
We have two more questions before we wrap up. Getting a lot of questions about will we receive a copy of this slide deck. We will make this presentation available online on our website, and a copy of this presentation that we're recording right now will also be available online to view at any time. And last question of the day, is the 100-foot line measured from an inside or outside of the polling place door, from the door?
From the outside door. So not from like where you can walk up to your it's not from like where you can walk up to the first election inspector that you meet. It's from the entrance to the polling place. So it's from the outside door.
Great. Well, those are all the questions we have time for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's segment of My Vote Counts, and have a great evening.